And thus, we come to the last keynote for today, and that is on the topic of Europe's future is open. And this is what Rafael Laguna de la Vera says. And he probably will virtually appear next to me. Oh, there he is. Hi, Adriana. Hi, good evening. And the program is of European digital sovereignty, and you are the head of this Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation, and one would like to develop sustainable impetus for a new ecosystem, and you will present the relevant areas into which Europe will have to invest in order to guarantee long-term independence. But I already know what will come. Okay, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. It's a bit like a home run because Univention is one of the partner companies of Open Exchange, a company that I founded and that Univention had been working with. Now I changed the sides. I don't know whether I ended up or moved to the dark side or the bright side, but definitely the other side. And Adriana, this has changed me a bit. Let's see what it is. But I would like to take this from a context as to what Europe stands for and what technologies stand for. And the title is Europe's Future is Open. How do we come up with that idea? And I will talk about technology initially, and that is digital technology. And if you think back the last 250 years, so when we started getting into the technological boom, then we can say that technologies always went through three phases. One invented something which was very useful at one point, and one didn't really care about the rest. And this usually then led to a situation that technology was useful but also quite dirty. So one didn't really care about the rest. So if you think about pictures of industrialization when it started, steam engine, coal, and how the city smelled, and I'm old enough to still remember this, how the cars were polluting and stinking, and if you were at Cologne at the Rudolfplatz, you even got dizzy and nauseatic. And you forget about this because technology, once it has been growing out of the teething problems, it starts in optimization phase, it gets better and more useful, but it's still half dirty, and then at the end there's the cleanup and technology gets clean. And this is what we've seen in energy consumption, where we go more and more towards clean and renewable. This is what we've seen in cars, where from these loud and stinking boxes in the past, we got more and more cleaner with the old technology. And then we had this discussion about electric cars and hydrogen, and then they get cleaner and don't stink anymore. And for digital, it's not different. So I've got the feeling that the digital services, anything that we do with computers today, is somewhere between phase one, the very dirty phase, but also a bit useful from time to time, and the phase of optimization. But it is still stinking a lot, and this everywhere. And I always have a bit of a bad conscience because I was one who accompanied this industry, and I was participating in this. So I was also one of the reasons why I created this bad smell, and I tried to change this with the companies that I founded, and now with the Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation. But we've got quite a lot of construction sites. Let's start with the one which has to do with security, resilience, and reliability. Almost all of our computers are working on an architecture, or using an architecture which was developed by John von Neumann 70 years ago, the digital architecture. So there are address data and codes that are shared, and there are so many tech vectors and all these safety gaps and security gaps and all this nonsense that we've got right now. And other network architectures that we use today have never been developed for such an expansion. The first IPnet, these were 3 computers, and yesterday night we've got 1 10 billion iPhones out there and maybe 3 billion Androids and PCs, and everything is a thermostat. So 10 out of a billion, and they use protocols which have not been built for this. So we are still using an architecture which is very, very dirty and very, very dangerous. Second point, the electricity consumption is increasing linearly with the computers, and we want more and more performance. And the interesting algorithms that we see, like Bitcoin, which has a completely distributed and spread blockchain, these are keywords that you've heard several times today. So it's a cool technology, but in order to be fully distributed and in order not to have a single point of authority, so this permission-free will entail a huge electricity consumption. So does that have to be this way? So does performance increase with electricity? And as long as we have to generate electricity, this might not be the best idea to do so. Thirdly, we're talking a lot about algorithms and data and big data. And thanks to machine learning, this is a mimicry of intelligence, which often we call artificial intelligence, which to some extent is very impressive, but sometimes also quite nonsense. But these data have a bias because they do not reflect our value system, which means that the algorithms derived from this, because machine learning is nothing else than a generator of algorithm, they've got the same bias as our data. So all the discrimination that we've got in real world and don't want to have, and everything that we try to untrain people of doing, is then getting in our systems, which then take decision on us. And this is quite dirty. And then even more dirty, we create new media, and social media, I think, is the main topic. Media which in the end generate a loss of truth, because we have an alibi carrier getting the same validity as science. And then we've got these alternate facts, which is really quite classical. So the good news of the bad news is that really not needs to be done. And we ask ourselves whether we have been already outtaken in Europe, whether we can still do this. Well, we've got all these stinky boxes on the road, and we have to do something. So for the big cleanup, we in Europe and Germany are really very well positioned. Why is that so? You might ask yourself, why are we so well positioned in Europe? Because we're always trailing behind. And I think that Europe is very much compatible to the cleaning and digital. So one had been asking, what are the European values? It's peace, democracy, and rule of law. It's maintaining human rights, respect, and solidarity, the liberty of the individual, tolerance, and the possibility to fulfill your dreams. And I think that most of you would sign this, underwrite this, say, yes, we do this, this is what we're going to do. But how did this system of values develop? Well, we invented ourselves, and this during Enlightenment in the 1700s. And I don't know whether everybody was aware of this, but you probably know that at the time the definition of truth was in the hands of church and of dukes, and they said what is true and what is not true, and what is possible and what is not possible. And this worked for some time. But when you open your eyes and look into the sky and you see, well, the Earth is at the center and the sun is surrounding us, and if you look then at the paths of the different points in the sky, then all this is very strange, and it doesn't really make sense if the Earth is at the center. And then we developed a method to get closer to truth. We developed a thesis, what we believe is true. Then we say how we want to check it, and all the means that we use for chemical elements, or also the telescope, which we make available to then check our thesis. And if it then really proves to be true, then we say that's truth. And this is what we make available to everybody and say, okay, find faults in my thesis, but as long as you can't prove that there's something wrong, then it's not truth. So, but this is not eternal. The truth can always fall and be replaced by a new truth. It's not absolute, but it has to fulfill these claims. So alternate facts have to be at least undergoing the same process and to be maintained. And what does this lead to? This leads to the depriving of power of the noblemen and clergy, and products convey values. So if products come from a different value system, these values will be part. And that social media generate alternate facts probably is true, that they come from regions where the values of enlightenment are not that highly esteemed. And this ruthlessness has advantages if you want to conquer markets. If you have to think about data protection and the maintaining and safeguarding of all the principles, then you have to think more and work more. It is much more difficult to have open and good systems instead of silos, proprietary silos. And this is probably why the first step of technology is dirty and does not really reflect values. And the values are not only good or considered to be by us in Europe, but in China, India, anywhere else, or the US, you will also see a lot of people approving this. And we also have a lot of difficulties that we create ourselves. GDPR, what we complain about, is implemented. I had the talk to Audrey Peng, the digital minister, the Minister for Digital Affairs in Thailand, and she said she will introduce something similar like GDPR. So apparently we develop products which convey the values of Europe. So a Made in Germany 2.0 or Made in Europe 2.0, this is our chance that we've got the values. And this is why I invest into this. Well, if you look at the Enlightenment values, so it's participatory, it has to be understandable, it's free, everybody has to be able to understand it. You've got a thesis and a truth at the back. Then open source is the Enlightenment path for software development and software management. So basically, we only use these principles for these technologies and the innovation so that the values that I just mentioned will also get into digital products. And this is the big cleanup that I see. This is the big cleanup for digital products, which then offer a huge opportunity to us. Now, you might quite rightly say, well, everything will be possible with the open source. What about hardware? And the answer is not everything is possible, and not at the same time. Some advances of the dirty technology are that high that we have to ask ourselves the claim that we have with regard to the technology. How much time do we have to turn them into clean technologies, and what are we going to focus upon first? And I ask myself, how do I assess disruptive innovation, and what should we invest in and what should we not invest in? Because at the end of the day, there should be an outcome. If after 30 years there's no outcome, well, for that you would use basic research. So for me, there has to be a result, not as quickly as in VC, and we can invest in pre-product stages. But at some point in time, such a disruptive innovation has to have a benefit for people and for taxpayers, because it's the taxpayers' money that I spend at the agency. Peter and a few others and myself, we work on a framework to say what is the need with regard to disruptive innovation. And sometimes it's not the same, and sometimes it's negligible. I give you the current state of thought. It's not completed, but a framework. Just imagine that you have a ruler that is a slide control, and the first slide control is a lifetime of a service. So if you make something available, is it only living very shortly? Is the vaccination control for COVID? Or is it something that you want to be together until the end of the day? Is it your partner, your manager, or your AP system, something that you don't lose that quickly? Then, secondly, how complex is the system that the software or the service solves. If it's not complex, if it's easy, then it can be changed quite quickly. And this is why it is quite acceptable to use video conferencing systems that are not open. If they are not open, you can change them very quickly. Even Messenger, if you can take along your contacts. So which Messenger service you use is not that important. But complex office documents, there a lot gets lost because they are complex. And if you convert them, then you know that a lot of information gets lost. So complexity, that's the second slide control. And the next slide control is data sensitivity. If you have an open portal about vaccination rate in different states, then it doesn't live very long. It's not very complex. And why couldn't one do it in ABS? Because that will disappear. And if ABS offers advantages because it's faster, higher, better, then we can do it. I wouldn't know which advantages ABS should have, because 1 million users suddenly want to see at 8 a.m. what is happening, and then you need to scale up, and this is maybe maybe they are less expensive, so I don't see a problem. However, if data become more important, if these are enterprise data, if this is from politics, person-related data, then the slide control moves further and further. Because with person-related data, you have to be particularly cautious. That's the third slide bar. And the fourth that I just came up with is the market importance of what you're doing. If nobody wanted to earn money, if it's not important for Germany, for Europe, if it's not strategic, just take COVID again. This is something you need. It's hygiene. But if it's a strategic project of yours, if it has a huge market potential, then one doesn't want the data and the information that is processed, and even the use data should not go to a third or fourth party that you don't want it. And then the slide bar is quite to the right. So if you then think of sovereignty, if you want to turn it into just one figure, then you just have to add up those 4 slide bars. And the exclusion criteria, if one is at the very right-hand side, then that's it. Then we don't need it, because a few things cannot be replaced by others. Otherwise, you just take a mean, and then you look where you stand. And then you will see that the claim of sovereignty is quite high for a lot of things. And this is why it is natural to just submit sovereignty if you just put it into the service of one of the dirty systems. We need clean systems. And the second one is, and then I stop or end my presentation, the second range of criteria, how this sovereignty could be created. So let's say we've got something that needs sovereignty, then again it's very easy. Think of an X and Y axis. On the Y-axis is our performance to achieve something in technology or market, and on the other axis you've got our claim with regard or need or requirement with regard to sovereignty. So these slide bars that I mentioned. So how high is our need? If we have a high capability and high requirement, then we should be leading in this technology and this market. And we actually should be, because we can do it and we want it, and then we've also got a big market for our product. And then within this field, we should be market leader and follow this claim. But you cannot always have it, because it's not always that you have excellent capabilities. Not always is the own market big enough or the own requirement of sovereignty high enough to justify such an investment. And then the claim for sovereignty, if it's not that high, but if our capabilities are still okay, then we should just enter into competition with others who can also do this, and should try to allow the market to regulate this. Some will come to us, and others will prefer to go to the competitor for their own reasons. However, if the claim of sovereignty is high, but our capabilities are not yet high enough, so others are market leader with their dirty technology, then we have to do something principally differently, and that is then disruption. Here we have to be the disruptor. That is, we have to break up the principles, we have to do something fundamentally differently, and we have to disrupt or jump over these possibilities. And here open source is quite good, because you can activate all those outside of the monopoly, and these are always more than the monopolies. You could say that large US, American, and Chinese companies are huge. They've got 35,000 engineers. They've got 30% increase per year. But if you think about the budget of the German Federation or the EU, it's nothing. We could easily do it, but we just need to get organized, and we have to work into or towards the same direction. And what could be better with the open one, the confederated one, and it doesn't require permission. And the result can be used by every. As soon as results are federated, then we can also generate the platform without having a gatekeeper who says this is allowed to go onto the platform and this is not allowed. So the claim for sovereignty is very high. We're not world market leader in a field. Then there's one thing, and that's the open path of disruption that we discussed today. And again, we cannot do this everywhere. 5-nanometer chips for human machines that we might think that we should create. And so far, there had been 3 manufacturers that could have done it. Now there are only 2. One is Samsung, South Korea, and the other one is TFC in Taiwan. Intel just said a few days ago that they won't do it. But now Fred Gelsinger is the CEO, and maybe they will try it again, but they will need many, many years. So to say now, we also would like to do it, and somehow, and that the year after next, this is something we can't achieve. We can have the goal, but then we have to know that we need 10 to 15 years and would have to invest. But we also need to do something during those 10 to 15 years. So the interlinked trade chains are not a bad idea, because in such a situation, we have to get to the negotiation table. We have to say, dear TSMC and Samsung, please develop the chips, because otherwise we cannot really produce our cars, and cars are just a few 100,000 or a few million, but not billions, like mobile phones. But then we give you something. Negotiation is giving, taking, making a deal. So you need to lose parts of your sovereignty because you have to give something. But this is okay if we don't have a different choice. As the more we are leading, the more we are disruptive and innovative, the more we can give, and the more we will get from the negotiation. But there's another reason why this is so. That is that we have completely uncoupled delivery and supply chains, because the stronger the economic dependence between nations, the less likely we are to stage wars. So I think the whole global market supply chain led to a situation that we in Europe have been living in peace for the last 75 years. So it's not a bad idea to go to the negotiation table. But then it doesn't really take long. And as you've seen in the US, they then quickly disappear. We don't know what will happen in China, so it can take until this turns into a fair negotiation partner, and they are not yet a fair negotiation partner. But again, even in China as well, there's a development and there's a new generation. So it's always a good idea to go to the negotiation table, especially once one doesn't really have a lot of capabilities in the technological field, but one still has a negotiable sovereignty claim. If it's non-negotiable, then it doesn't make sense to negotiate. So there are 2 fields in this quadrant, always on the side of this high claim of digital sovereignty. And this is where open source technologies are and will be leading purely out of principle. And this is why from SPRIND, if I look at this, I look at these 2 criteria. And if they're on the right-hand side, then there's only one path forward, and that's open. Thank you very much. Thank you, and I applaud. And I could add something for so many points, but I will just start with the very most important one. So you should start to merge with open, federable, and permission-free. And then you don't have to say it that often. Or maybe sticker, or maybe a cap. Yeah. So my pitch to Peter and you and all the others. But I wanted to ask you, but you explained it. This analogy with dirt producers. And it was nice to see that it was really dirty, but also dirty practice. Because this aspect, how much energy and how much resources are taken up by this. This is something that is often not seen. And dirty practices are not just like standing at a crossroad and you start to cough because it's so polluted. So this was all very wonderful. And I'm no longer alone on stage. These T-shirts, yes, we will produce those T-shirts. Okay, I want to get the first one then, please. Yeah, sure. No, you can actually stay, and then we will have a handover. I wanted just to say that T-shirts are important, and I don't know whether you would like to respond to the speech. The analogy with the dirt producer was great. It was great to see that you stress that products and systems that one is developing in are not value-free, they're normative, and you have to be aware of this, but this can also be considered to be an advantage. And I think and feel European, and I think it's good to see it on this level, but also in consequence beyond Europe, because, as you said, these are European values, but they're not limited to Europe. They are globally desired and respected. These were my highlights from the talk. If there are no further questions or any other need for exchange,
well, I'd say, Rafael, you can stay with us virtually, so thank you very much. Well, those are things that we've been working on for a long time now, and I really have a feeling that things are moving. And that's the big question, always. You're in the thick of it. We've been discussing it for years now. We've discussed it with many people. Rafael is very well connected there. He talks to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people. There are a few people that we convince with open, permit-free. But, of course, it's not enough yet. And whether it is enough to make the pendulum swing in the other direction is something we can't be sure of. So that means we really need to keep drumming it in. And that is the way I've seen it always. I studied with Peter Kruse. Maybe you are aware of who he is. He has he studied chaos theory a lot. And if a system is in a chaotic state, it takes a small influence only to swing them one way or the other. And that's where we might be. We have a lot of uncertainty. We realize now we can't keep going like this, like we did in the past. And then maybe now we really have the chance of determining how we can move to a new stability. But in chaos, there is never a predetermined way forward. And there are many forces pulling in all sorts of directions. So what Rafael just said, this analogy with clean technologies, was a very important aspect, I think, because this has an entirely different strength, basically. There's no alternative to it. that technology needs to become open. So we realize that we can't make energy using coal anymore. We are aware of the fact that we can't drive around in cars burning diesel fuel anymore or other fossil fuels. And if we can move to the point where we are aware of the fact that digitization cannot be executed in a dirty way, which puts us in a position where we can't implement our European values anymore, and where it will be really tough to get it back, as it already is in some areas. If this awareness becomes public knowledge, and if you think of chaos theory, then the ball may roll into the next valley, and then we are in a position where our hand is forced in a way that I really wanted, where we can actually move forward and actually do things. And that is where I would like to, I know, Rafael, you would like to add something to it. That would be my preliminary conclusion. Well, Peter, at least I'd like to add one thing. It truly is a chaotic situation we're in. It's a cacophony of voices. And what makes me optimistic is that more and more competence is moving in here. The problem in the past in German politics has been that there was very little digital competence there. And to bring a little bit of light into this area is that if politicians listen more to experts and more specialist knowledge is taken heed of. So if the federal government calls on me to establish such an agency, then this is a very courageous step. So that's a positive thing that I can see, and a great opportunity. Yes, of course, I imagine. Right. So I think that's something we saw today. And I found it impressive in the panel discussion where we saw that there were two CIOs, not of the largest states in the Federation. It would be great to have North Rhine-Westphalia and Bavaria involved next time around, saying the same type of thing. But as they said, the North is leading the way. That's what we're doing. Here from Schleswig-Holstein and Bremen and Hamburg. As it has been said, we've already cancelled our contracts with Microsoft. We have moved into a situation where we want to change things, and Univention as a service provider enables this with a lot of different companies from the open source industry, and we can see in many, many other ways a massive interest in this. And we're capable of doing this because there are people who are digital natives who are moving into decision-making positions, and they know what we're talking about. They were not telling stories here. And I have to say, this format, of course, is a bit bizarre for us as well, Rafael, and everybody. I'm standing here in the very same location where I was a year ago, instead of with the difference that we had 500 people here now, and now I have a monitor that I'm facing, and I feel bad that we are on the same stage, even though we are at 2 meters distance, but we're not wearing masks. It's just borderline now. And the bizarre thing is you don't get any feedback, or very indirectly via Twitter or other channels. But normally when you're on the stage and you see whether people are staying put or moving out of the room, you can see whether you're capturing your your audience or not. So I would like to thank everyone who was involved by Univention, all the speakers, you, Rafael, Adriana, for this successful facilitation. This would be the moment where the audience would clap their hands now. The Green Party had something. They have something where they what do you call the flowers? The sunflower. Yes, that's the logo of the Green Party, and they just raised up instead of applause, so we could have this digital sort of an applause. Well, I really thought this was a good solution. And we saw that we are moving forward extremely fast. We're moving away from a chaos to a clean digitization, which really will match this millennium, or at least this century. I think it's a great thing, and particularly I would like to thank the marketing team, particularly Alice. Alice, would you please come up front? I will simply move away here. I'll move to the back a bit to increase the distance. So for you, that was completely new. It was a huge challenge, an extreme number of uncertainties, and we were all very nervous this morning. Now we can say it went very well. So thank you very, very much. Well, we hope that it worked. We don't really know how the world outside of Bremen is thinking about us. We're in a little bit of a bubble here in Bremen with a few people, more than just over 10 people. It was an interesting way of planning this. The latest highlight was Monday when in Bremen all congresses were banned, and we called up all sorts of authorities to find out, can we hold this conference with 10 people in the room, and we got the green light on Monday night. And this is the way it's been going for months now. So thank you, but I can't really read this. I hope this is positive feedback. That's applause that we can see there. By way of conclusion, I would like to thank Schwarzer, the agency that we got involved when I said, okay, I can do normal events, but I've never done this kind of digital thing, this virtual thing. So they created an open source platform, Valueless. As we speak of digital sovereignty here, we were looking for an open source platform which didn't even exist a few months ago, so it was all experimental. I hope it worked very well. So thank you very much. Well, thanks again to everybody. We are looking forward to see as many as possible of you as possible next year in person again here. One of the greatest things was that we managed to pull this off, and now there's a beer, and we'll have something to eat, and then we go home. Normally would have a beer and a bite to eat, but now we just go home. It's a bit strange, but anyway, thank you very much to everybody who have made their contribution, Rafael and all the others. Okay, well, let's say goodbye. Goodbye from Bremen to the world. Bye-bye. See you soon.